Well, hello, everyone. I'm Art Taylor. I'm the president and CEO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. And you'll know us because we are the monitoring organization that evaluates charities in relation to a set of accountability standards. And we produce reports on organizations so that donors and others can know if these organizations are trustworthy. Um, we believe that this work is highly important to our sector. And in addition to these evaluations that we do, we want to create opportunities for charities to learn from each other and from other experts. In line with that, we have produced today, this webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've been able to gather together some brilliant minds to help us have this discussion today, and I'll be introducing them shortly. But what we want to do today is have this webinar as a foundation of what it means to look at equity and inclusion for a charity, how to frame and think about these issues, and how to move your charity forward in its organizational equity and inclusion journey. And we especially want to focus on your internal talent systems as a key lever. I wanted to also mention that the Wise Giving Alliance, setting its standards, in its preamble to the standards, calls for this type of interaction on equity, inclusiveness, and diversity. In fact, our preamble to our standards strongly urges organizations to promote pluralism and diversity within their organization's board and staff and constituencies. And there should be policies within these organizations, even though we recognize that organizations may vary widely in their ability to demonstrate this. But every organization should at least have a policy consistent with its mission that fosters this type of inclusiveness. And I wanted to raise that because as a organization that is focused on accountability and trustworthiness, we believe that increasingly our society is moving to a place where donors and others will be expecting this of you. And we think that this therefore makes diversity, equity, and inclusion a key element of accountability and transparency.
It's a ton of really great information from a sector perspective and also an organizational perspective. And I think a couple of things, incredibly helpful in understanding kind of what to prioritize and how to begin thinking about within an organization. I always like to approach things when I am working with organizations to look at the systems and say, you know, the talent systems are the ones that people experience. So performance, promotions, onboarding, hiring, if you can look at those and then the data that you've provided really begins to show how those systems in many organizations are not working in an equitable way. This is not a set of best practices. You know, you can't like buy the book and do the process and then it's done. It has to have emotional ownership of this. It is not merely an intellectual piece. And while data can be informative, and the Building Movement Project, you and the Building Movement Project have proven that so many times, there is kind of this emotional, moral, philosophical basis that the work must come from.
But one of the things that I like to use kind of like as a point of reference when I work with organizations is, you know, if you think about a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum, as far as where an organization may be in relationship to their journey toward race equity, on the one side, you have a monocultural organization, right? On the complete opposite side of the spectrum is an anti-racist organization with full liberation. I'm also going to challenge us. I think that given everything that's happening in our country and the stark reality of oppression, right? And racism, particularly against Black folks and against Indigenous. I mean, that's the history of our organization. We have a huge, again, racial leadership gap, and it's no coincidence. I think it's also important to look at our language. Oftentimes when I see reports or even programming around like how to help people of color, I cringe a bit because I think we really need to flip that narrative so that we can begin to shift the way that we think and the way that we relate to one another. So one of the things I always tell people is instead of using terms such as minority or people of color, which I've never really liked, wouldn't it be great to simply refer to us as the global majority? I mean, if you think about it, in the US, folks of color, we're the global majority. Why are we being called a minority? Makes no sense. But in using the term global majority, what happens? There's a shift there, right? There's a shift. There's more dignity in that. There's more power in that, and there's more truth. A few words of advice would be to always ask the question internally and externally, how am I being part of the problem? How am I going along white dominant culture right now? Let me take a step back. Let me see what's my center of gravity.
It's building a practice, right? It's knowing the information or the data, knowing what's working and what's not working, getting the input, and then flipping that narrative to say, where am I sustaining or perpetuating things that are not helpful anymore, that are not going to lead me to be an equitable anti-racist organization? And it's being willing to, I think people sometimes think that it's a one and done. This is not that at all. This is very much a journey, even though we use that word euphemistically sometimes. This is very much iterative work, and it is a journey, and it changes. The entire world has changed in the last 90 days, but also in the last 9.
I am the Chief Diversity Officer for the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association. And yes, we operate in 70 countries around the world. That would be true. But we also evolved our work because we recognize that equity is critically important. And in fact, equitable health and well-being for all is important. And so I also stand here as the Executive Vice President of the Office of Health Equity, in addition to being AHA's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. And I say all of that because fundamentally, we recognize that these two things needed to be integrated and provide our organization a lens to which to be successful. And so how are we doing that on the front end? And then back to the purpose of today's webinar, things you need to know to effectively build your D&I strategy. Well, guiding values is as early as we started. So our ethos, who are we? What do we stand for? How do we make decisions? We have 8 guiding values, and I won't take you through all 8 of them, but I will mention a couple of them because they give you an essence of why D, E, and I are important. One of which is building powerful partnerships. And partnerships recognize the fact that you, A, don't have all the answers, and B, that you can probably get a lot more done with others than you could ever get done yourself. Another is ensuring equitable health and well-being for all. Really clear, no confusion there. A guiding value is our work should ensure equitable health and well-being for all. Another is speaking with a trustworthy voice. And as you know, you can't speak authentically or have an authentic message unless you fully understand, you fully listen to, and you fully engage and include all those voices that need to be heard so that you can contribute to the greatest good. And then lastly, another one worth mentioning is meeting people where they are. So if you think about the spectrum of our diversity and being inclusive, if you think about socioeconomic conditions, if you think about geographic conditions, if you think about race, if you think about culture, if you think about all of those things, meeting people where they are allows you to think about all people where they are as opposed to where you'd like them. And so that's the lens from which we operate, and that on the very front end gave us the opportunity to accomplish the results that I mentioned prior. And so when we think about diversity, when we think about equity, when we think about inclusion, we think about the whole person and the community, and wanting to be a champion of change, a catalyst to enable equitable health and well-being for all.
It isn't just a piece here or a piece there. It is literally shifting a mindset. It is constantly recognizing and reckoning within your organization of how do we do things? How do we make decisions? How does this align with our culture? How does it align with our ability or inability to serve our constituencies? How far do we go in serving those constituencies? How can we best serve them? And asking those, to your point, all the way upstream and then downstream, looking at results and constantly reckoning with that. It is iterative. It is a cycle.
But I wish you all some success in your journey. We need you to be successful in this journey to create a more just society, a society in which we've laid a landscape where everyone can be productive within their abilities and within their opportunities. And I think it is incumbent upon the nonprofit sector to take the lead, just as it is incumbent on all leaders to lead, not only in the work that you're trying to accomplish, but in this particular area also. Because as I mentioned at the upfront, the Wise Giving Alliance really believes that high performing and accountable organizations are also ones that take these issues very seriously.